Story number 1. Trapped in the Shadows. The haunting photo we were never meant to take. A few years back, something truly unsettling happened to my cousin and me. I was 16 at the time, and it was the summer break. One evening, I decided to crash at his place for a fun sleepover. After more hours of binge-watching horror movies, we felt a surge of thrill-seeking energy. My cousin mentioned an old abandoned apartment complex nearby that was scheduled to be torn down in just a couple of days. The whole area had been fenced off, warning signs plastered everywhere. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to sneak in, thinking we'd capture some cool, eerie photos for laughs. The entire complex was tightly boarded up, doors and windows sealed like they hadn't been touched in years. My cousin, always the adventurous one, led us to a gap in the fence, and soon we were wandering through the shadows of the decaying buildings. As we roamed, we noticed one apartment on the 3rd floor with a window that hadn't been fully boarded up. From below, we could see into the dark room. My cousin snapped a picture with his phone, thinking it'd make a cool shot. Later that night, back at his house, we were reviewing the photos. When we got to the picture of the window, we both froze. In the photo, a woman stood inside, barely visible in the dim light. She was wearing a pale, torn dress, her skin deathly white, and her long, tangled hair covered part of her face. Her expression, it was blank, almost sorrowful. The thing is, there was no one there when we took the picture. Terrified, we rushed back the next day to check. Everything was sealed up tight. No possible way anyone could have been inside. To this day, we still have that photo, and we can't explain it. Story number 2. Obsessed and Unseen. The terrifying stalker who lured me in. This story isn't mine, but from my friend, whom I'll call Sam. It happened when Sam was just 11 years old. Living in a quiet neighborhood, Sam had always been popular at school, but there was one girl, Mia, who took her crush to disturbing lengths. Mia, who was 17, lived nearby and had known Sam for years, but she had grown more obsessed over time. At first, it was innocent. Messages every day asking Sam how he was doing, telling him to be safe. But it quickly turned eerie. Mia would text things like, "I see you're skipping lunch," or, "Your little brother's crying, you should check on him." Even though she wasn't there, Sam stopped using his phone, but the stalking didn't stop. Sam's mother worked late, so he often had babysitters. One day, a new sitter showed up. Mia, she acted friendly at first, but there was something off. She got closer to Sam's mother, almost too close. One afternoon, Mia approached Sam at school, claiming his mom had gone out of town for a week and wanted him to stay with her. Reluctantly, Sam agreed. At Mia's house, things turned sinister. Her parents weren't home, and Mia played strange games, like pretending they were married or blindfolding him for hours. 5 days in, Mia left for work and locked the house. Alone, Sam turned on the TV and froze. It was a missing child report, and he was the missing child. Suddenly, the TV clicked off, and Mia was standing behind him with the remote. Panicking, Sam screamed and bolted for a window. Luckily, a couple passing by heard his cries and called the police. When the authorities arrived, they found Sam bound and blindfolded in Mia's room. She was taken away, but the memory of her obsession still haunts Sam to this day. Story number 3. The Nightwalker, a stranger in the shadows. About 6 years ago, I lived in a quiet suburb in Canada. Being a night owl, I often found myself restless after my family went to bed. To clear my head, I took long walks around the neighborhood, enjoying the stillness of the night. For years, I wandered the empty streets without fear. Nothing ever seemed out of place. That all changed on a cold Thursday morning. Around 1:30 a.m., I was walking near a small, rarely used park, a few blocks from my home. It was dead quiet, with no cars, no people, just me. As I turned down a dimly lit street, I noticed something strange. At the far end of the street, I saw a figure. It was a man. But he wasn't just walking, he was dancing. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a waltz, but with a weird, jerky stride. He danced straight toward me. At first, I thought he was drunk, so I moved to the edge of the sidewalk to let him pass. But the closer he got, the more unsettling it became. He was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing an outdated suit. As he neared, I saw his face clearly. His eyes were wide, staring off at the sky, and his mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, the kind of smile that sends chills down your spine. I quickly crossed the street, my heart racing. When I looked back, he had stopped dancing. He stood perfectly still, one foot in the road, staring directly at me with that same eerie smile. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. When I glanced back a second time, he had disappeared. Relief washed over me until I saw him again. This time, he was crouching in the shadows, still watching me. I ran. I don't know how far or how fast, but I didn't stop until I reached my house. Even now, years later, that haunting smile follows me in my nightmares, as if he's still out there, waiting. Story number 4, The Haunting Photos, a cleaner's chilling discovery. In the early 90s, my aunt, Rena, worked as a house cleaner in a small New Zealand town. Most of her jobs came through word of mouth or flyers in local shops. One day, she received a call from an elderly woman asking her to clean an isolated farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The woman's voice seemed frail, and she gave Rena a long list of unusual instructions, including strict times to arrive and leave. Despite the oddness, the pay was generous, so Rena agreed. On a chilly Wednesday morning, Rena drove out to the farmhouse. It was eerily quiet, with no sign of anyone nearby for miles. The house itself was old and creaky, standing alone in the middle of a vast, barren field. As she started cleaning, Rena felt an unsettling tension in the air, like she was being watched. About an hour in, she heard the back door creak shut. Startled, she checked outside but found no one, and there were no other cars on the property. Nervously, Rena resumed cleaning, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. When she reached the last room, a dusty, dim bedroom, what she found sent her heart racing. Spread across the bed were dozens of black and white photographs. As she examined them, her blood ran cold. Each photo was of her, cleaning other homes, getting out of her car, even through the windows of her own house. Terrified, Rena grabbed her things and fled the house, calling the police as she sped away. The woman who hired her claimed it was a break-in and denied knowing anything about the photos. The investigation led nowhere, but Rena was left with a deep fear that followed her for years. Shortly after, she moved to a different town, leaving the memory of that farmhouse behind, though the images still haunt her dreams. Story number 5, The Stranger Under My Bed, a chilling first apartment experience. Just over a year ago, I moved into my very first apartment, a small unit in a quiet neighborhood. Excited about my new place, I was in the middle of unpacking when something terrifying happened that I'll never forget. One evening, after running downstairs to get my mail while chatting with a friend on the phone, I returned to my apartment and casually sat on the bed to open my letters. In the middle of my conversation, I dropped my phone on the floor, and as I reached to grab it, I saw something that made my heart freeze. There was a person lying under my bed. The figure was motionless, facing away from me. My mind raced, but I fought to stay calm. In the most normal voice I could muster, I told my friend, "Hey, I dropped my phone. I'll call you back after I shower." Keeping my composure, I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and turned on the shower to mask my next move. Then, I climbed out the window, heart pounding, and called the police. They instructed me to stay across the street and keep an eye on my building. I watched anxiously as the police arrived. A few minutes later, they emerged with a disheveled man, thin and pale, clutching one of my kitchen knives. Apparently, he had slipped into my apartment while I was getting the mail and had been waiting for me to come back. That night left me shaken, Press. I never imagined my new home would become the scene of such a nightmare. The thought of what could have happened still haunts me. Since then, I have been extra careful every time I step through my front door, always checking twice. Story number 6, The Man in the Mask, a terrifying night in the snowstorm. When I was 22, my boyfriend and I decided to stay at my family's remote cabin during a heavy snowstorm, surrounded by nothing but dense forest. The only thing standing between us and the elements was an old wooden door, barely held shut by a broken lock and a few bricks. Late that night, while we were curled up on the couch, my boyfriend suddenly shook me awake, claiming he heard something outside. I brushed it off, assuming it was just an animal wandering through the woods, but then I heard it too. Faint noises coming from the shed. My heart skipped a beat. I muted the TV, and after a tense silence, I gathered enough courage to peek outside. There in the deep snow were fresh footprints. They led from the shed straight to the back of the cabin. I rushed to the window, only to be met with a sight that still sends chills down my spine. A man in all black, wearing a featureless white mask, just standing there, staring at us through the glass. Panic surged through me. I grabbed an old hunting rifle from the closet, barricaded the door, and dragged my boyfriend into the bedroom. Moments later, the silence was shattered by loud, deliberate bangs on the front door. He was trying to get in. We stayed hidden, hearts racing, hoping the makeshift barrier would hold. After what felt like hours, the banging finally stopped. We didn't dare move until morning. At dawn, we cautiously opened the door to find a new set of footprints leading back into the woods. We never found out who the masked man was or what he wanted, but that night left a permanent mark on me. The thought of his cold, empty gaze haunts me to this day. Story number 7, The Stranger in Grandma's House, a close call with death. A couple of years ago, I used to visit my grandpa's house daily to help him with chores. One afternoon, I arrived as usual, but something immediately felt off. The front door was unlocked, which was strange because Grandpa always kept it bolted. As I stepped inside, I heard movement upstairs, drawers opening and slamming shut. Assuming Grandpa was in his room, I called out to him. Suddenly, I heard the bedroom door slam shut. Before I could investigate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Grandpa, telling me he'd be home late because he was at his weekly poker game with friends. My heart dropped. Whoever was upstairs wasn't him. I grabbed a kitchen knife and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher that there was an intruder in the house. Minutes later, the police arrived, storming up the stairs. As they approached the bedroom, a gunshot rang out, shattering the tense silence. It turned out the intruder was our next-door neighbor, a man I had known my entire life. He had broken in, armed and desperate to rob the place, completely unaware that I had walked in on him. If I had opened that door, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. The encounter left me shaken, knowing how close I came to confronting someone so dangerous. I'll never forget that cold feeling of dread and relief that day, my life had been spared by a simple phone call. Story number 8. The Man in the Closet. A dinner night turned nightmare. One evening, my husband and I came home from a quiet dinner to find our front door slightly ajar. I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. My husband told me to wait outside while he rushed upstairs to grab his shotgun. Determined to check the house, he went room by room, thoroughly searching, but everything seemed untouched. The police arrived shortly after and found no signs of forced entry or anything amiss. With no answers, we tried to put the unease behind us and went to bed. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a scream, my own. I had opened my eyes to see a shadowy figure staring at us from the closet. My heart pounded as I realized we had forgotten to check there. My husband quickly grabbed his shotgun and yelled for the man to come out. Instead of complying, the intruder flung open the door and made a frantic dash for the front door, vanishing into the night before we could react. We were left in stunned silence, knowing that someone had been hiding just feet away from us the entire time. I still can't shake the feeling of how close we came to something far worse. That night changed our sense of security forever. Story number 9. Eyes in the Dark. A year of fear. About a year ago, I began experiencing unsettling events in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. It all started one night when I heard the ominous creak of my closet door. Cautiously, I opened it, finding nothing but my clothes hanging silently. I shut the door tightly, dismissing it as my imagination playing tricks on me. The following evening, the creaking returned, followed by strange noises from the air ducts above, like something was crawling through the dark. I brushed it off as the house settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, as I lay in bed, I noticed the closet door had creaked open again. I mustered the courage to check, but once more it was empty. My heart raced as I turned to look at the air vent, only to be met with a pair of cold, unblinking eyes staring back at me. Panic surged through my veins, and I screamed. But when I ran to my parents' room, they dismissed my fears as mere nightmares. Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences only escalated. Sometimes I could hear faint whispers coming from the vents, chilling me to my core. My parents insisted I was imagining things, but I knew I wasn't alone in that room. Eventually, I decided to sleep with the light on, but the feeling of dread never faded. To this day, I can't shake the memory of those eyes watching me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment when I might be too tired to notice. I left home for college, but I still feel a chill whenever I think about that room. Story number 10. The Watcher of Silver Lake. I live with my family in a secluded cabin in the Poconos, not far from a serene lake where we often enjoy summer afternoons. Last Saturday, while my kids splashed joyfully in the water, I spotted something unusual, a dark, round shape drifting toward them. Panic surged through me as I rushed to pull my children out of the lake. But when I turned back, the object had vanished without a trace. Feeling unsettled, I kept the incident to myself, not wanting to alarm my wife or the kids. Later that night, driven by an uneasy feeling, I grabbed a flashlight and returned to the lake, determined to uncover what I had seen. The night air was still, but the silence was shattered by a sudden, powerful splash. My heart raced as I swung the beam of light around, and what I found made my blood run cold. Emerging from the dark water was a figure, tall and humanoid, but grotesque. Long, tangled hair hung in front of its face, obscuring any features. It stood motionless, water dripping from its pale skin, fixating on me with an unsettling intensity. Terrified, I dropped the flashlight, the beam flickering out as I sprinted back toward the safety of the cabin. The eerie sensation of being pursued lingered as I locked the door behind me. I haven't mentioned the encounter to anyone, fearing it would only spark more dread, but each time I hear the wind rustling the trees or the lake lapping against the shore, I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, lurking just beneath the surface, watching, waiting. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share.